My name is Aveline Mercer, and at the will reading, my parents burned a $29 million check in front of my face. They tore it in half like it was a receipt, then lit it with a silver lighter my grandfather once kept in his desk. I watched it curl into smoke over a crystal ashtray, while my mother muttered, "This is what you get for walking away from family." I didn't flinch, not because I'm cold, but because that check? It wasn't the real one. What they set on fire wasn't money. It was their illusion of control. The lawyer's office smelled like lemon polish and old grievances. My mother sat stiff in her pearls. My father clenched his jaw like the world owed him something, and my sister Delia leaned back in her chair, waiting to be handed everything she assumed was hers. They barely looked at me, and that was the point. I wasn't supposed to matter. I was supposed to disappear quietly, forgotten in the background of their perfect family portrait. But Grandpa never forgot. He saw what they did to me, how they froze me out, made sure I never came back. He didn't leave me a letter. He left a plan they just triggered by thinking they'd destroyed me. So I sat there, letting the ashes drift. I didn't reach for them. I didn't protest. I just smiled. The kind of smile that knows the fire isn't the end. It's the beginning. And when they realize what they really burned, they'll understand something else. The game they thought they were playing? I designed it. The morning of the will reading, I stood in front of my closet for 13 minutes before I chose the shoes. Not the suit, not the coat. The shoes. Black heels I hadn't worn since the last time I testified in arbitration. Pointed toe, low shine, loud click. I didn't need them for height. I wore them for the sound they made on marble. I wanted them to hear me coming. The law office was the kind of place that wrapped its silence in wealth. Thick rugs, slow elevators, brass fixtures that caught just enough light to look old money deliberate. The receptionist didn't even glance at me when I gave my name, just pointed toward the conference room like I was another nuisance on a calendar. That used to bother me. It didn't now. Inside, my mother sat already posed in her cream suit, her lips pressed in a line too tight to be grief. My father was beside her, arms folded across a tailored chest. Delia, the perfect daughter, the shining star, the orchestrated successor, sat like she owned the room. One leg crossed high over the other, sunglasses still perched on her head, like she was waiting for someone to valet her past. They barely looked up when I walked in. "Still doing that thing where you pretend you're above all this?" Delia asked, her voice sugar-laced and sharp. I didn't answer. I just took the seat farthest from them, unfolded the napkin in my lap, and rested my hands. Mr. Carson, the family attorney, cleared his throat. "We're here to fulfill the final wishes of Walter Mercer," he began. "As per his instructions, all immediate heirs are present." He looked at me last when he said it. Not with pity, with something else. Respect, maybe. He opened the folder. The paper inside made a clean, deliberate sound. "To Delia Mercer," he read first, "the lake cabin in Branson, the Steinway grand piano, and the painting in the study." Delia blinked. "That's it?" Mr. Carson didn't respond. He simply turned the page. "To Charles and Aveline Mercer, his son and daughter-in-law, the 1931 Packard, the crystal decanter set, and a $5,000 donation to the Heritage Club in their name." My mother made a sound like she'd just swallowed bleach. My father leaned forward, ready to object. "And to Aveline Mercer," Mr. Carson said, pausing now, "Walter leaves the full balance of his liquid estate, totaling $29 million and change, along with the controlling share of Mercer Holdings Trust." The room stilled. A drop of sweat beaded at my father's temple. Delia's jaw twitched. My mother said nothing, but her fingers curled tightly over the arms of her chair. "That's fraudulent," my father barked. "It's notarized, sir," Mr. Carson replied calmly. "Executed in person. He updated his directives in March. This is valid and binding." "He was confused," my mother snapped. "He hadn't seen Aveline in years." "I saw him 3 months ago," I said quietly. My voice landed like a pin in the center of the room. Delia leaned forward. "You cut us off, remember? You left. You didn't even come home when Dad had his heart scare. Now you just show up and collect a fortune like it's a consolation prize?" I didn't flinch. I turned to Mr. Carson. "There was a letter with the check." He reached beneath the table and retrieved a sealed envelope. Heavy wax etched with Grandpa's signet, a trillium flower carved in black. He handed it to me. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single folded check and a handwritten note. For the one who never stopped watching, even when they stopped seeing you. I saw everything. This is yours. Not because you asked, but because you never did. Before I could respond, my father reached across the table and snatched the check from my hand. "What are you doing?" I said, but my voice didn't rise. He examined it like it was fake, then handed it to my mother, who sneered and tore it in half. Then again, until the pieces fluttered like confetti. "You don't get to walk back into this family and walk out with everything," she said. "You burned your bridge a long time ago." She reached for the lighter my father had placed on the table, clicked it, lit the edges. The check curled and blackened, smoke rising between us in tight spirals. She dropped it into the ashtray. Delia looked smug. "There, now we're even." But I didn't blink. I didn't reach for the ashes. Because that wasn't the real check. I'd known this would happen. Grandpa had known it too. That they'd want something to destroy, something to feel like they still had power. So we gave them a decoy. The real check, and the real documents, wired, sealed, and placed far from this room. The envelope in my coat pocket still held the real plan. The one Grandpa and I had drawn up in secret. He knew who they were. He also knew who I was becoming, so I smiled. The kind that builds slow, deliberate like a fuse catching fire. Let them think they won. Let them feel powerful for one last afternoon. I stood, folded the now empty envelope, and slipped it into my purse. The only sound in the room was the click of my heels on marble as I walked out. Clear, sharp, defiant. No goodbye, no explanation. Just the sound of control shifting, back to where it belonged. I didn't go home after the will reading. I drove aimlessly for a while. Through downtown, past the old train station, the brick library where Grandpa used to take me on Saturdays. I wasn't avoiding anything. I just needed the silence before I opened the envelope he'd given me 2 months earlier. It was still in the inner pocket of my coat, still sealed, still warm from being held tight in my lap as the check turned to ash. When I finally pulled into the lot behind my apartment, the sun had dropped just enough to cast long shadows across the sidewalk. I took the envelope upstairs, placed it on the kitchen counter, and stood there, staring at it. Grandpa had given it to me in a diner off I-43. We'd met for breakfast. He ordered French toast, even though he wasn't supposed to have sugar, and pushed the plate toward me without asking. "You're going to need this," he'd said, slipping the envelope across the table with a napkin wrapped around it like it was something fragile. "Don't open it unless they do what I think they will." I remember watching his hands, spotted with age, still steady as stone. The same hands that used to lift me into his truck when I was too small to climb. He'd looked at me then, like he was measuring whether I was ready. "They think silence means surrender," he said. "But you and I, we know it means preparation." That was the last time I saw him alive. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a smaller sealed pouch, a bank transfer confirmation, and a note in his unmistakable hand. "Aveline, if they burn it, you'll know the fire wasn't for you. It was for them. What matters is in the vault. Don't go alone, and don't wait too long." The bank receipt was dated 2 weeks before his passing. A wire transfer, $29 million, to a trust account in my name. My chest didn't tighten, my eyes didn't water. I just stood there quietly, the same way I had in that conference room, feeling the shape of something shift in me. He'd known. Every slight, every look, every holiday I wasn't invited to, every phone call that didn't come. He'd seen it all. He hadn't fought them out loud. He'd done something better. He'd built a firewall around me. I didn't sleep that night. I read through the trust paperwork 3 times, then again with a notepad. I looked up the trustee's office. Private, independent, not affiliated with the family. I checked the balance. Still there, untouched. Then I turned to the pouch. Inside was a USB and a single-page letter. "Plug this in only when you're alone. Use a private device. And remember, nothing digital is ever truly erased, So copy, backup, print. Then hide it again. I waited until sunrise. Something about daylight made it easier to face the past. I connected the USB to my old laptop, the one that had no cloud sync, no saved passwords, nothing traceable. The folder had one file, watchme_first.mp4. I clicked. The screen flickered. Then there he was, Grandpa, sitting in his sunroom, backlit by the soft gray light of a Midwest morning. His sweater was buttoned wrong. His eyes were tired, but steady. If you're watching this, then they did exactly what I thought they would. He leaned forward, close to the lens. I know what they've tried to do to you. I watched it happen one piece at a time. The way they cut you off from the inheritance when you turned 21. The way they turned your room into a guest suite while you were still in grad school. They told me you were unstable, that you were wasting money, that you didn't deserve any of this. His voice caught for a moment, then steadied again. I pretended to agree, Aveline. I nodded along, but every time they spoke against you, I wrote it down. I tracked it. And when they tried to convince me to remove you entirely from the trust, I decided then, if they wanted to cut you out so badly, I'd make sure they never could. He held up a small leather journal. In here is everything. I've copied it for safekeeping. You'll find it when you go where I asked. He paused, then smiled. Sad, but clear. You never begged, never played the victim. That's why you earned it. But they'll come for you now, because they think this money means you win. They don't understand. This was never about the money. It was about reclaiming your name. The screen faded to black. I sat back in my chair and exhaled for the first time in hours. Everything I'd feared for years had happened. But so had something I never expected. Someone had planned for it. Someone had believed in me. The phone rang later that morning. No caller ID. I let it go to voicemail, then checked it an hour later. It was Delia. Hey, Aveline, I know it's probably not what you want to hear, but... Can we talk? She paused. Just us. No drama, no lawyers. I need to see you. She didn't sound angry. She sounded off. Nervous. Unsure of the role she was supposed to play now. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I printed copies of the trust confirmation, the letter, the video stills. I uploaded backups to 3 different encrypted storage systems. I secured the physical folder in a fireproof lockbox I bought that afternoon. Then I called the number scribbled at the bottom of Grandpa's note. Langley and Cross Private Holdings, Vault Access Division. The woman on the line confirmed there was a secure box reserved under my name. I'd need the physical key and 2 forms of ID. I already knew where the key was. Wrapped in a handkerchief at the back of the wooden jewelry box Grandpa gave me when I turned 18. He'd said, "You'll need this when you're ready to take back what's yours." At the time, I thought he meant something symbolic. A future, a direction. Now I knew better. It was literal. The key was cold, brass, and older than I'd realized. By nightfall, I'd made an appointment for the next day. I laid everything out on my desk. The USB, the trust printouts, the key, my ID, the folder. Then I poured a cup of tea, turned off my phone, and sat by the window. The city outside moved like it always did. Traffic lights blinking, people walking, horns echoing in the distance. But something inside me had gone still. Not numb, not broken, focused. Because tomorrow, I'd open the box. And everything would change. Langley and Cross sat in a quiet stretch of downtown, the kind of building you'd miss if you blinked. Low signage, soft security, all gray stone and anonymity. I stepped through the vestibule just before noon, handed the receptionist my ID and the old brass key. She didn't ask questions, only typed, nodded, and motioned me through a side hallway. Minutes later, I was seated alone in a paneled room with 1 chair and a sealed box resting on the table like it had been waiting. I didn't rush. When I opened it, the weight inside hit harder than I expected. The check was real, cold to the touch, marked with the official seal, with my full name spelled clearly. Underneath it, a red wax envelope with Grandpa's Trillium insignia still intact. And below that, tucked in a velvet sleeve, a black flash drive labeled only with his handwriting. Open if they erase you. The moment I saw it, I understood. He knew. Not just about the inheritance, not just about the resentment. They'd try to go further. And they had. The note inside the envelope was short. Grandpa's voice echoed off the page with every word. If you're reading this, they showed you who they really are. The money isn't the real gift. The real gift is knowing exactly who you're not obligated to love anymore. By the time I stepped out into the cold air again, I wasn't wondering if I should act. I already had. Back in my apartment, I locked the door, pulled the blinds, and placed the envelope on the table, just as the wind outside began to pick up. It was then that I noticed the envelope taped to the outside of my door, clean white, centered, precise. No address, no stamp, no handwriting. Inside was a single typed message. What they burned wasn't the real check. Don't speak, just move wisely. Look in box array at the security firm. You'll understand everything. I read it once, then again. Then I folded it and placed it under a stack of bills, like tucking away a secret. Whoever sent it wasn't guessing. They knew, not just about the SEOIC, but about the entire arrangement. They were close enough to warn me, but distant enough to remain unnamed. That scared me more than if they'd signed it. That night, I barely slept. I sat in the living room, barefoot, lights off, the flash drive and envelope spread across the table. I wasn't afraid. I was preparing. At sunrise, I called Langley's secondary vault division and requested access to box array. The woman on the line hesitated, typing quietly, before confirming the box had been pre-registered under my name by a Walter Mercer 5 years prior. I scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. I arrived early. The room they led me into this time was smaller, lined with steel drawers that clicked when opened. The clerk slid one forward. Box 8. I opened it slowly. Inside, beneath another layer of cloth, was another certified check in my name. A thick legal file with an embossed trust seal, and, what made my stomach drop, a death certificate. Mine. It bore my full name, listed a pedestrian accident, confirmed via dental records. The date was from 3 weeks ago. For a few seconds, I didn't move. The air felt thinner. I blinked and reread the name. It wasn't just that they'd tried to discredit me. They'd filed for my legal death. My pulse slowed. Not from panic, something colder. They hadn't just wanted to take the money. They wanted to make sure I couldn't fight for it, and if I didn't exist, I couldn't contest anything. I returned to the apartment in silence and plugged the black flash drive into the oldest laptop I owned. No cloud, no connections, no risks. There was only one file inside. A video. I clicked play. Grandpa appeared on screen, older than in the last clip, bundled in a knit sweater, sitting near the window with a view of the old pines. His eyes were heavy, but not confused, just quiet. "If you're watching this one," he said slowly, "then they didn't just cut you out. They tried to erase you. I thought they might." He looked down, then back at the camera. "They've been soft-shaping your disappearance for years. First, the family stories, then the financial freezing, now legal records. They always said you were unstable, that you didn't belong in the family's future. But I saw what they were doing. That's why I created a second file, a sealed record of every conversation, every date, every pressure point." He raised a file folder. "It's in Unit 19B, Delmore Storage, under a false ledger. I filed it the year your mother told me she didn't consider you one of us anymore." That's when I knew this wouldn't end at words. The video ended. I whispered the code to myself. Delmore Storage, Unit 19B. I drove there the next morning, past the edge of town, where pine trees stretched toward the clouds and fog still hovered over the ground. The chain-link fence rattled in the wind, but the padlock gave under my key with a slow groan. The door creaked open to reveal a space lined with crates and dust-covered tarps. But at the center, placed like it had been waiting, sat a black fireproof case with a yellowing strip of tape. Grandpa's handwriting was faint, but unmistakable. "If they ever burn you, open this." I lifted the lid. Inside was the unedited will, naming me sole heir and executor. A notarized statement from Grandpa's lawyer, confirming he'd signed it while fully lucid. A journal filled with notes, accusations, summaries of family meetings, times they'd tried to convince him I was unstable, greedy, dangerous. There were transcripts, too, printed emails, even a video still of Delia mid-argument, gesturing at him with something sharp in her eyes. The truth wasn't just documented. It was detailed, organized, bulletproof. I scanned everything with a mobile app and uploaded it across encrypted cloud drives. Then I backed it up onto 3 microSDs, all labeled with different codes. One would stay on me, one in my safe, one at Sylvia's office. By the time I locked the storage unit again, the sun had climbed high. I could feel its heat on the back of my neck, but I wasn't sweating. I was anchored. Back home, I laid everything out in order. Documents, video stills, logs. I placed my birth certificate next to the forged death record. Then I stared at them both. One proving I had lived, one declaring I had died. That night, I filed an appointment request with the county registrar's office. When they called back to confirm, I asked the clerk what documentation I'd need to reverse a false death record. She sounded confused at first, then professional, then quiet. "Has this happened before?" I asked. "Not often," she said, "and not usually by accident. If it was filed maliciously, we'll need to involve legal counsel." "I have legal counsel," I told her. "And proof." She hesitated, then scheduled me for 9:30 a.m. Thursday. As I hung up, a notification pinged across my phone. An unrecognized transfer to my bank account had failed. The app displayed an error, then locked me out. I tried my credit card. Suspended. I called my financial institution, gave my information, waited through hold music, and a polite voice telling me to be patient. When a real voice finally picked up, they told me my identity was flagged as deceased and all my accounts were temporarily frozen, pending verification. I didn't argue. I thanked them. Then I ended the call. Then I laughed. Quiet, bitter, but rooted. They'd gone all in. Tried to kill me on paper. Too bad for them. I came prepared. And this time, I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting to exist. I arrived at Delmore Storage just before noon. The road that led there curved past cracked sidewalks and long abandoned storefronts that used to mean something when I was a child, back when Saturday errands with Grandpa felt like adventure and not escape. Now the rusted signage and faded banners just reminded me that the places we think are permanent never are. Unit 19B sat near the back of the lot, partially obscured by an overgrown row of hedges. I could hear the hum of nearby power lines, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots, and not much else. The lot was empty. The weathered chain-link gate had been left unlatched, just like the last time I came. Only this time, I wasn't uncertain. I knew what I was walking into. I had a key in my pocket, a flashlight in my hand, and a copy of my birth certificate tucked inside a leather folder that hadn't left my side in 3 days. The padlock turned easily, and when I pulled up the rolling door, the metal groaned, but nothing gave way. The inside smelled like old paper, machine oil, and cedar, familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. This was a place Grandpa had prepared long before the world turned on me. Or maybe he had simply seen the world more clearly than I ever did. At the center of the unit, positioned like a centerpiece in a room no one was meant to enter but me, sat a matte black briefcase with reinforced corners and a fingerprint lock. Taped to the top in that same slanted, steady handwriting were the words, "If they ever burn you, open this." The latch clicked open under my thumb. The lid creaked, and the inside held nothing fancy. Just precision, thought, protection. On top lay a single-page letter, written in ink that had faded slightly but was still legible. Aveline, it read. There are 2 kinds of legacy, the kind that's spoken and the kind that's buried until someone's desperate enough to go looking. You were never meant to beg for your name back. You were meant to reclaim it quietly and completely. Beneath it was a thick manila folder marked in red, Legal Originals, unaltered. I opened it and immediately recognized what I was looking at. The real will. Not the one read at the conference table. Not the one that gave Delia the lake house and my parents their curated heirlooms. This version was dated just 3 weeks before Grandpa's death, signed, notarized, and witnessed by someone I hadn't seen since childhood, Mrs. Lenora from our old church, the one who used to bring gingerbread cookies to the Christmas fundraiser and sat with Grandpa during his last stroke recovery. This version of the will left everything: estate, assets, shares of Mercer Holdings, properties in Charleston, Savannah, and Chicago, to me. And not just as heir, as executor, as final authority. I sat on the crate nearest me and inhaled slowly. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was fact. The pages beneath the will were even more damning. Letters, some typed, some handwritten, from Grandpa's assistants, former financial advisors, and even a junior partner at the law firm who'd expressed discomfort with the pressure applied to redact Miss Mercer's name from active accounts. One letter, dated a full week after my supposed legal death certificate had been processed, referenced a final transfer to an account matching the trust now frozen under my Social Security number. In other words, someone in my family knew I wasn't dead and filed the death anyway. That meant intent. That meant fraud. That meant the paper trail I was now holding didn't just restore my existence. It could dismantle theirs. I didn't feel satisfied. I felt surgical. Every page I scanned, every note I labeled, was another incision. I wasn't here to retaliate. I was here to remove the rot. I kept reading. Grandpa had compiled transcripts, handwritten summaries of calls he'd received, in which Delia warned him he was choosing the wrong daughter. There was an email printed out from a private server where my father wrote to a law partner about cleaning the estate transition if Ava doesn't show. Ava. The name they used when pretending I was a memory, not a person. In one of the margins, Grandpa had written, "They want the holdings, they want the name." But they forget I gave it to her for a reason. At the bottom of the briefcase was a hardbound ledger, much older than the rest. Inside were decades of company records, votes, board motions, sale histories, carefully logged in Grandpa's neat mathematical hand. The final 20 pages, however, were different. Looser, more personal. I paused on one entry, dated 6 years ago. Delia suggested I amend the stake assignments again. She said Aveline wasn't reliable. I asked her what reliability meant. She said, someone who stays visible, even when things are messy. I thought about how Ava kept showing up to care for me in silence, while Delia posted her perfection online. One of them showed up. The other performed it. That's when I started planning. I don't know how long I sat there reading. The light through the skylight had shifted, dust spiraling in the air. My phone vibrated twice, both from unknown numbers. I ignored them. When I stood, I moved deliberately. I scanned every document into the mobile app on my encrypted burner phone, labeled them by category: will, financial fraud, identity tampering, medical history, shareholding rights. I uploaded everything to a triple-backed cloud server connected to nothing in my name. I didn't call Sylvia Farrow until I was already back in my car with the briefcase in the trunk. "I have it," I said when she picked up. My voice wasn't shaky. It was clean. She didn't ask what, just said, "Come in tomorrow, quiet door, 10 sharp." That night, I checked my main phone only once. There was a new voicemail from Delia. Her voice was tight, brittle. "Aveline, I don't know if you're alive or if someone's pretending to be you, but if you are." I didn't know about the death certificate. They just asked me to sign a statement. I thought it was about the trust restructure. I didn't read it all the way. Please. If this gets out, it'll ruin Mom. She doesn't know everything either. I sat on the edge of my bed in silence, phone still pressed to my ear after the message ended. I believed her. Or at least, I believed that she didn't know the full scope. But she knew something. Enough to stay quiet. Enough to sign. They always told me I was dramatic. Too private. Too detached. They didn't realize detachment is how you survive a family that smiles while filing your obituary. I rose and opened the small safe in the closet, placed the briefcase beside the trust paperwork, the USB, and the original SEC. Then I shut the door and turned the lock. No tears, just precision. I brewed tea, stared out the window into a city that moved like nothing had happened. Because to the world, nothing had. To the world, I still didn't exist, but I did, And I had proof now. Proof that couldn't be twisted. Proof they couldn't unburn. What they'd tried to erase was still here. And I wasn't walking away this time. I was walking in, with fireproof truth. The courthouse was older than I remembered. Gray stone carved with initials no one could read anymore. I'd walked past it 100 times as a teenager, wondering if justice ever really happened inside. That morning, I wasn't wondering. I was there to find out. Sylvia Farrow met me at the entrance to Side Room 3B, the quiet hearing chamber reserved for probate disputes that didn't warrant a public spectacle. She looked exactly as she had in her firm's office. Suit pressed, eyes calm, every movement deliberate. She didn't smile, and I appreciated that. We didn't need warmth. We needed precision. "They'll be in there," she said softly, nodding toward the double doors. "Don't look at them unless the court asks you to." I nodded. I already knew that rule. Inside, the room smelled like wood polish and dust. My parents were seated at the petitioner's table. My mother wore her courtroom pearls. My father sat back, arms crossed like he was already bored. Delia wasn't there. I figured that meant she either wasn't summoned or they didn't want her close enough to say something reckless. Their attorney looked young, confident, too confident, the kind of lawyer who believed paperwork mattered more than people. Judge Henley entered and wasted no time. The room quieted. "We're here today to address petition 337B, he said, eyes on the file, contesting the execution of the Mercer estate and resolving the dispute over the named heir. My father's lawyer rose first. He launched into a well-rehearsed speech, questioning Grandpa's mental state, suggesting undue influence, referencing the version of the will presented at the initial reading. I didn't interrupt. Neither did Sylvia. We let the words hang in the air, exactly as we planned. When he finally sat, Sylvia stood, walked to the front, and opened her folder. "In addition to the formal trust documents, Your Honor, we present a sealed affidavit from Walter Mercer, recorded 3 weeks before his passing, stating his mental clarity and intent." She passed the document forward. The judge accepted it. "We also submit the video testimony of Mr. Mercer, recorded voluntarily, time-stamped and verified by third-party storage with no known family access." She turned slightly. "And a notarized will, executed 2 months after the version submitted by the petitioners, witnessed by Mrs. Lenora Hayes." I didn't move. I just kept my eyes on the table in front of me. The judge lifted the affidavit, read silently for a moment, then gestured to the clerk. "Proceed with the recording." The lights dimmed slightly as the monitor clicked on. Grandpa appeared on screen, thinner than I remembered, but focused. He sat in his study, the familiar trilobite fossil still resting on the shelf behind him. When he spoke, the room seemed to still. "If you're watching this," he began, "then it means someone is trying to deny what I signed with full mind and full heart." He looked directly into the camera. No trembling, no confusion. "I made this change because I believe in my granddaughter's character. Not her charm, not her performance. Her character. Because when everyone else took from me, she never asked for a thing." He exhaled slowly, voice steadier than ever. "You may say I was coerced. You may say I didn't understand, but I did. I saw them try to bend the story, bend the law, bend me. So I gave Aveline the one thing they can't counterfeit, truth." Then the screen went black. Silence followed, heavy and final. Sylvia didn't speak. She let it settle. My mother looked pale. My father shifted in his chair. Their lawyer scribbled something urgently, but neither of them moved to respond. Judge Henley glanced between the documents, then back to me. "Miss Mercer," he said, voice measured, "have you anything to add?" I stood, but didn't step forward. "No. Your Honor, I trust the record." He nodded once, then looked to my parents' attorney. "Anything further?" He hesitated, then, "We request additional time to review the validity of these materials." "No," Henley replied simply. "You've had time." He closed the file in front of him. "The court finds the revised will valid. The assets and control of Mercer Holdings shall be transferred as outlined by Mr. Walter Mercer's final directive. Furthermore, given the evidence of intentional misrepresentation, the court recommends an audit into the petitioner's actions, regarding identity suppression and trust tampering. My mother let out a sharp breath. My father said nothing. "This hearing is closed," Henley finished, voice clipped. "Let the record stand." The gavel hit the block, sharp as a shot, and just like that, it was done. I didn't smile. I didn't turn to look at them. I simply gathered my folder, nodded at Sylvia, and walked out. Outside, the air smelled like rain, even though the sky was clear. I paused on the courthouse steps, not for drama, but to breathe. Everything they tried to take from me was still mine, and everything they thought they owned, now subject to investigation. They brought lawyers. I brought truth. And in the end, truth didn't need to raise its voice. It just had to hold its ground. The morning after the ruling, the city moved like it always did. Horns, buses, distant footsteps on the sidewalk. But something inside me no longer matched the rhythm. The shift wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It sat under my skin like steel. I didn't tell anyone what happened in court. The people who needed to know had already tried to erase me. The rest didn't deserve the story. Instead, I stayed in my apartment, brewed tea I didn't drink, sat in the chair I'd once curled into after watching my accounts vanish. The silence wasn't empty now. It was earned. Around noon, a package landed on my doorstep with a soft thud. No knock, no note, just a cream envelope inside. I opened it slowly. Delia's handwriting. She hadn't written much. "If you don't tell your version, they'll fill in the blanks. I hope you still believe in the truth, even if it costs us everything. No apology, just fear." I set it beside the rest. Court transcripts, certified documents, the flash drive that had saved my name. Let her keep her silence. I had nothing left to offer her but space. That afternoon, I pulled out the last folder Grandpa had marked. Open when they go quiet. I had kept it sealed through all the hearings. Now I opened it. Inside were documents, transfer forms, shareholder directives, and a blank signature line under Majority Control Mercer Holdings. And a note. "They may never speak your name again, but they'll never own it either. Let them keep their silence. You own the name now." I read the line twice, then a third time, until I stopped seeing words and started seeing a map. The next morning, I dressed in black, simple and sharp. I arrived at the Mercer Holdings office 20 minutes early. The receptionist blinked when I gave my name. "You're—" she started, then caught herself. "Conference room A, they're ready." There were no handshakes when I entered, no welcome speech, just chairs, paper, and the quiet awareness of something irreversible. I sat, signed where they had waited for weeks, and didn't ask questions. When I stood, it wasn't dramatic, just final. The company wasn't a trophy. It was the last piece of truth no one could touch. I left the building without speaking to anyone. Outside, the wind was cold. It didn't bother me. At home, I opened the folder of unfinished dreams I had locked away since the day my identity disappeared. Old business models, funding outlines, even my first draft of a financial literacy app built for women. I hadn't touched it since the first time my family called it naive. Now I placed it at the center of the table, beside a new one labeled Mercer Initiative. Not because I needed legacy, but because I finally had the right to build one that no one else could take. That night, I posted a single image, my signature on the new shareholder agreement, lit by the skyline. No caption, no names. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was exact. No one called, no one reached out, not even Delia. I didn't feel bitter. I felt whole. They had tried to strip my name, bury my voice, and burn my proof. And still, I had walked out with everything they thought I needed them to grant. I didn't. I never had. The next morning, I walked past the old Mercer estate. I didn't go inside. I didn't even slow down. I just glanced at the gate and let the past sit exactly where it belonged, behind me. For years, they told me that silence meant surrender. But they were wrong. Silence, when chosen, is a blade. And mine had just written the final chapter.